About 5 years ago, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I worked as a dancer and lived in some rough neighborhoods. I was young and inexperienced, which led me to make some unwise choices and end up in a few dangerous situations. At the time, I was renting a place in one of the worst areas of my small city. My boyfriend lived nearby, just down a long, one-way street that ended at a busy intersection. It was around 10 p.m. on Christmas night, and he had just returned from spending the evening with his family. He told me he needed to handle a few things at home, so I was left waiting for him. I didn't own a car back then, and since he hadn't offered to pick me up on his way back, my frustration grew. Impulsively, I decided to walk to his place, a choice I soon regretted. The one-way street I had to take ran through a notoriously unsafe neighborhood, especially at night. The street was lined with a few houses, but the bulk of it was dominated by a large elementary school and an adjacent recreational field. It was poorly lit, making the area eerily dark. To reach his house, I had to walk against the flow of traffic, meaning any approaching cars would face me directly. I'd made it about halfway down the street, with the school and field on one side and the road on the other, when I noticed a car approaching. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it, but then it slowed down and pulled up alongside me. All four windows rolled down, revealing four young men inside, two in the front and two in the back. They immediately began shouting at me and making crude, aggressive remarks. I tried to ignore them and quickened my pace, desperate to reach the well-lit intersection near my boyfriend's apartment. Their shouts grew louder as they urged me to come back, but since it was a one-way street, there wasn't an easy way for them to turn around. The only route to circle back was on a side street further down. I was already on edge, but the situation escalated when they suddenly stopped the car, put it in park, and all four of them started getting out. The moment I saw them stepping out, I took off running as fast as I could toward the intersection. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. Fortunately, because of the one-way street, I had a significant head start. They didn't have enough time to catch up to me or loop around before I reached my boyfriend's place. I'm not sure if they even tried, but the thought of them parking their car, getting out in the freezing cold, and pursuing me was absolutely terrifying. When I told my boyfriend what had happened, he was furious that I hadn't just waited for him. He pointed out how badly the situation could have ended, and I had to admit he was right. That night made me realize how reckless I'd been, and I swore to never walk alone in that neighborhood after dark again. This happened on Christmas Eve after my shift at work. I usually work the late second shift from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., but that night we stayed late and didn't finish until around 2 a.m. The warehouse where I work is in a fairly safe area, but just a few blocks away, things start to feel sketchy at night. When our shift ended, my friend and I were the first ones out to the parking lot. We were warming up our cars, which were covered in frost, and talking while we waited. We'd been there about 5 to 10 minutes when I noticed a small car driving by slowly. At first, I didn't think much of it since the road was icy, and I assumed the driver was just being cautious. But a few moments later, the car circled back and pulled into the parking lot across from us. This caught my attention because it was the parking lot for a welding shop that's usually empty after 10 p.m., except for the occasional police vehicle setting up speed traps. I pointed it out to my friend, who agreed it seemed odd. Then, a man got out of the car and started walking toward us. Strangely, the car he came from didn't stay, it drove off as soon as he stepped out. The man headed straight for us and asked my friend if he had a lighter. His tone wasn't threatening, but his sudden appearance made me uneasy. While my friend spoke to him, I decided to walk over to my car and start scraping the frost off my windows, hoping to avoid engaging with him. As I worked, I saw him glance at me and then call out, asking for something. I didn't want to seem rude, even though I felt uneasy, so I responded while staying near my car. The guy was a lot bigger than me, probably around 6 feet 2 inches or 6 feet 4 inches and at least 250 pounds. I'm about 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, so his size made me even more nervous. He started making small talk, asking what kind of work we did and complaining about working on Christmas Eve. His questions felt more like he was trying to size me up than genuine curiosity. I also noticed him glancing at my wallet a few times, which made my discomfort grow. I remembered some advice my grandpa had given me: if you're in a sketchy situation, stand tall, puff out your chest a little, and maintain steady eye contact to appear confident and unshaken. I made sure to stay visible to the parking lot cameras and kept my distance. Then, the man asked me if I could give him a ride to his house, saying he'd run out of gas at a nearby store and needed to grab money from home. He mentioned a grocery store about a mile east, but he had approached us from the west, which didn't add up. That detail, combined with the fact that the car he arrived in had just dropped him off, raised red flags. If his house was westward, why didn't the driver who brought him take him home in the first place? Something felt off. I recalled reading about scams where people ask for rides during the holidays, only to rob the driver once inside the car. At that moment, I was convinced this guy was up to no good. I calmly started backing toward my car, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. I told him firmly, "I'm good, man. You need to leave our company property." He didn't take it well and responded with frustration, saying, "Come on, it's Christmas Eve." His expression turned angry, but I held my ground and repeated, "You need to get off the property." Reaching my car, I opened the door and leaned inside, pretending to grab something. In reality, I was reaching for a knife I keep under the seat for safety. When he saw this, his demeanor shifted. He hesitated, then turned and walked away without saying anything. I watched as he disappeared into a dark alley about a block down. I went over to my friend's car to tell him what had happened. He said the guy had been asking him for money for a lighter and even tried to convince him to drive him to an ATM. 2 days later, I saw the man's picture on our local police department's Facebook page. They were asking for information about him because he was wanted for several robberies committed during Christmas week. It was Christmas evening in 2012, and I was about 16 or 17 years old at the time. My mom and I were driving home after spending a wonderful day with our extended family in Greater London. The car hummed steadily in the background as we chatted. At first, our conversation was light, reminiscing about the day and laughing over the funny stories our relatives had shared. Eventually, the topic shifted to Santa Claus, and from there, we began joking about other holiday figures like the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, reflecting on how magical those stories seemed when I was younger. As we talked, I brought up a memory from my childhood. I told my mom about a small jar she used to keep, one that held my baby teeth. The jar had a delicate design, with a bright blue fairy perched on the lid, its wings standing out vividly in my mind. I remembered how special that jar had felt, almost like it contained a bit of childhood magic. But as I spoke, I realized I hadn't seen it in years. The last time I could recall seeing it was back in 2007, about 5 years earlier, when we were packing to move houses. Back then, I noticed it had black duct tape wrapped around it, probably to keep it secure. My mom said she hadn't seen the jar in a long time either and wondered if it might have been lost during the move. We both felt a little sad thinking it might be gone for good. At the same time, I joked about how strange it was that she had kept all my teeth. It felt both sentimental and a little gross. We laughed and moved on to other topics. Not long after, we arrived home and walked through the front door, greeting our dog, Pika, as usual. My mom headed into the kitchen, and I followed her, but as soon as we stepped inside, we froze. Right there on the kitchen floor was the jar. It was broken into 2 pieces, and all the tiny baby teeth were scattered across the floor. At first, I thought my mom might be playing a prank on me, even though she'd never been one to pull practical jokes. But one glance at her face told me she was just as shocked as I was. This wasn't her doing. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and started calling friends and family, eager to tell them about the strange coincidence. Meanwhile, I stood there staring at the mess, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. The situation was completely baffling. Pika, our dog, was already around 11 years old at the time and was a calm, well-behaved companion. She never caused trouble or went through our belongings, especially when we weren't home. Most of our things were stored in places she couldn't even reach, like drawers or high cupboards. So how had this jar, which hadn't been seen in years, suddenly appeared on the kitchen floor? And why now, right after we'd been talking about it? I looked around the kitchen, searching for any clues, but nothing made sense. The jar's sudden reappearance, shattered and scattered, was completely unexplainable. It felt surreal, almost as if some unseen force had brought it back. To this day, I still can't figure out what happened or how. It's one of those strange, inexplicable moments that lingers in your memory no matter how much time goes by.